December 19, 1944, Bastogne, Belgium. Snow is falling across the Ardennes, muffling the sound of artillery and turning roads into frozen corridors of ice and mud. For 6 months, the Allied advance across Western Europe has followed a broad, grinding logic: pressure everywhere, steady momentum, no catastrophic risks. But on this day, that logic is about to fracture. German forces have launched a surprise counteroffensive through the Ardennes, punching a deep bulge into the Allied line and surrounding the vital crossroads town of Bastogne. Inside Supreme Headquarters, maps are being redrawn with growing unease. The stakes are no longer about speed or prestige. They are about whether the Allied front can hold together at all. At the center of this crisis sits General Dwight D. Eisenhower, confronting the most dangerous moment of the Western campaign since Normandy. Communications are fragmented. Intelligence is incomplete. Weather has grounded Allied aircraft, blinding commanders who have grown accustomed to aerial dominance. German armored units, many believed destroyed or incapable of large-scale action, are suddenly advancing with alarming coordination. The possibility of a major setback, even a political catastrophe, hangs over every decision made in these hours. While Eisenhower weighs how to contain the German thrust, another commander is already moving, literally and mentally, faster than anyone else in the room. George S. Patton, commanding 3rd Army far to the south, has been watching the situation develop with a mixture of concern and opportunity. Unlike many of his peers, Patton does not see the German offensive solely as a threat. He sees it as a gamble by an enemy already stretched thin, a move that could be turned against them if reacted to with sufficient speed and audacity. The shock comes when Patton informs Eisenhower that he can pivot his entire army, 3 corps, hundreds of thousands of men, northward and attack the German flank within 48 hours. Not plan to, not prepare for, execute. The room reportedly goes quiet. Such a maneuver defies conventional operational logic. Armies do not reverse axis under winter conditions without weeks of planning. Supply lines must be rerouted, units reoriented, coordination rebuilt from scratch. Every risk analysis produced by Allied staff doctrine argues against such a move. Patton's proposal leaves headquarters stunned because it exposes a truth many prefer not to confront. The existing plans are insufficient for the crisis unfolding. Bastogne is surrounded. American airborne troops are cut off and running low on supplies. If relief does not arrive soon, the symbolic and strategic consequences will be severe. Yet ordering a rapid, improvised counterattack risks disorganization on a massive scale. A failed maneuver could leave 3rd Army scattered, vulnerable, and unable to recover. What Patton has done, quietly, methodically, and without fanfare, is prepare for this moment in advance. For weeks, he has instructed his staff to draft contingency plans for a sudden northward pivot, even while officially focused on offensive operations elsewhere. These plans are not polished masterpieces. They are working documents designed to enable action under uncertainty. Patton understands that in modern warfare, preparation is not about perfect foresight, but about reducing reaction time when the unexpected occurs. Pressure now shapes every decision. Eisenhower must choose between doctrinal caution and operational improvisation. The German offensive has already achieved strategic surprise. Responding slowly risks allowing the enemy to consolidate gains and force the Allies into a defensive posture they believed permanently behind them. Responding too aggressively risks overextension at a moment when weather, terrain, and enemy strength are all unfavorable. When Eisenhower gives Patton conditional approval to move, it is not an endorsement of recklessness but an acknowledgement of necessity. The order is framed carefully, with caveats and coordination requirements, but the essence is clear. 3rd Army is free to act. What follows is one of the most demanding logistical and command feats of World War II. Orders cascade down the chain of command at unprecedented speed. Divisions that were preparing to attack eastward receive new instructions within hours. Road priorities are rewritten. Fuel allocations are redirected. Engineers work through the night to clear icy routes and reinforce bridges never meant to carry such traffic. Confusion is inevitable, but momentum compensates. Units move not because every detail is settled, but because delay itself has become the greatest danger. German commanders, focused on driving westward, initially fail to recognize the scale of what is happening. Reports of American movement are dismissed as local counterattacks rather than a coordinated shift. This misinterpretation buys Patton precious time. By the time German intelligence grasps the threat, American armor is already grinding north through snow-covered forests, compressing timelines the enemy assumed were fixed. Inside Bastogne, the pressure is physical and immediate. Encircled American troops endure constant shelling, shortages of medical supplies, and freezing temperatures. Morale holds, but only just. Every day without relief increases casualties and weakens defensive capacity. The knowledge that a relief force is moving, even one delayed by weather and terrain, becomes a psychological lifeline as important as ammunition. For Patton, uncertainty is constant. Weather forecasts remain poor. German resistance stiffens as the counterattack develops. Fuel shortages loom, yet he resists the temptation to slow down. He understands that partial success is not enough. The relief must arrive decisively, with sufficient force to break the encirclement and restore operational coherence. By choosing speed over procedural perfection, Patton forces the campaign into a new phase. Headquarters remains uneasy, aware that success and disaster are separated by thin margins. Every hour tests the balance between boldness and control, between initiative and coordination. The outcome is not yet certain, and the consequences, strategic, political, and human, continue to unfold as Third Army drives north into the heart of the Ardennes, carrying with it the weight of a decision that has already reshaped the battle. The forward elements of Third Army collide with the outer screens of German defenses as December 20 dawns under low gray skies. Snowfall intensifies, reducing visibility to a few hundred yards in places and transforming fields into treacherous expanses where vehicles bog down without warning. The terrain favors the defender, narrow roads threading through dense Ardennes forests, but Patton's orders remain unchanged. Keep moving, bypass resistance where possible, and leave pockets of German troops to be dealt with by follow-on units. This approach runs counter to the instincts of many commanders trained to secure flanks and consolidate gains. Yet Patton understands that time, not terrain, is the decisive factor. German units facing the northward thrust are themselves under pressure. Many are second-line formations hastily committed to exploit the initial breakthrough, lacking the cohesion and logistical support required to absorb a sudden counterstroke. Their commanders are forced to make rapid decisions with incomplete information, unsure whether the American movement represents a localized reaction or the opening phase of a broader offensive. This uncertainty fragments German responses, causing delays and misallocations that compound as the hours pass. At headquarters, reports arrive in uneven bursts. Some units advance faster than anticipated, covering distances staff officers believed impossible under winter conditions. Others stall against determined resistance, burning fuel and ammunition at rates that alarm logisticians. Eisenhower's staff monitors the situation with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Patton's gamble is working, but only just. Any significant disruption, a collapsed bridge or a coordinated German counterattack, could unravel the entire maneuver. Patton himself remains in constant motion, moving between command posts, questioning officers, and demanding updates that go beyond written reports. His presence exerts pressure downward through the chain of command. Divisional and regimental leaders feel the urgency not as an abstract directive, but as a personal expectation. This intensity accelerates decision-making at lower levels, where junior officers take initiative to clear roadblocks, reroute columns, and improvise solutions without waiting for explicit approval. The Germans attempt to adapt. Armored units are redeployed to block key approaches to Bastogne, while infantry formations dig in along ridgelines overlooking the roads. Yet coordination proves difficult. Fuel shortages plague German armor, and Allied artillery, once repositioned, begins to exact a heavy toll. Each delaying action buys time but fails to halt the advance entirely. The Germans are fighting for hours. Patton is fighting for days. Inside Bastogne, the situation remains precarious. Air drops are sporadic due to weather, and casualties continue to mount. The defenders know relief is coming, but they do not know when. Every distant rumble of artillery could signal either renewed German assault or the approach of friendly forces. The uncertainty strains nerves as much as the cold and hunger. By December 22, the pressure intensifies on both sides. Patton's lead elements encounter increasingly organized resistance, signaling that German commanders now recognize the threat. Engagements grow fiercer, and the pace slows. This is the moment headquarters feared, the point where speed collides with reality. Patton responds not by halting to regroup, but by committing reserves and shifting axes of advance, trading elegance for momentum. The consequences of this choice ripple outward. Supply lines stretch thin, trucks running nonstop along icy roads to keep fuel and ammunition flowing. Maintenance crews work in sub-zero temperatures to keep vehicles operational. Fatigue becomes a constant companion, yet the psychological impact of forward motion sustains morale. Movement itself becomes a weapon, reinforcing the belief that the enemy can still be beaten back despite the surprise and the weather. German commanders now face their own crisis. Units intended to push west are forced to turn defensively, undermining the original purpose of the Ardennes offensive. Every battalion diverted to stop Patton is one less driving toward the Meuse. The German timetable begins to slip, not because of a single decisive battle, but because of cumulative delays imposed by relentless pressure. As Third Army closes in on Bastogne, the scale of Patton's decision becomes clear. What began as a risky maneuver now threatens to collapse the southern shoulder of the German advance. Headquarters, once shocked, now studies the unfolding situation with a reassessment of assumptions. Speed, long regarded as subordinate to preparation, has altered the operational balance in ways no contingency plan had fully anticipated. The road ahead remains contested, and the relief of Bastogne is not yet assured. But the choice Patton made, to move first and solve problems along the way, has already reshaped the battlefield. Pressure, uncertainty, and consequence continue to define each hour as American forces drive forward, carrying the weight of a decision that cannot be undone. By the early hours of December 23, the sound of sustained artillery fire rolls across the frozen ground south of Bastogne. Forward observers report flashes through the tree lines as German batteries attempt to slow the converging American columns. The weather begins to shift, clouds thinning just enough to hint at clearing skies, but the cold remains punishing. Frostbite cases rise as quickly as casualty figures, and medics work under constant pressure, improvising treatment stations in barns and roadside ditches. Patton's advance elements now operate at the edge of endurance. Tank crews sleep in shifts inside their vehicles, engines idling through the night to prevent freezing. Infantrymen march with numb hands wrapped around rifles, every step a calculation between speed and exhaustion. Orders remain explicit. Momentum must not be lost. Even brief halts risk allowing German units time to reorganize and fortify the remaining approaches. German resistance stiffens as the Americans draw closer. Kampfgruppen formed from remnants of armored and infantry units launch localized counterattacks, aiming less to defeat Patton outright than to disrupt his timetable. These engagements are chaotic, fought at close range in forests where visibility is limited and command control is fragile. Confusion spreads quickly on both sides, but American units increasingly benefit from superior communications and artillery coordination. advantages that turn brief contacts into costly delays for the Germans. At higher headquarters, the tone of discussions begins to change. What had initially been viewed as a desperate countermeasure now presents itself as a defining operational pivot. Eisenhower's staff tracks German movements across the front and notes the growing pattern. Divisions intended for exploitation are being pulled back to contain Patton's thrust. The German offensive, once aimed westward, is now bending inward under pressure. Inside Bastogne, the defenders sense the shift before they see it. German attacks lose some of their earlier intensity, artillery fire becoming less concentrated as batteries are reassigned elsewhere. Morale improves cautiously, though supplies remain scarce and casualties continue to mount. The garrison understands that relief is approaching. But uncertainty remains their constant companion. No one can say whether Patton's forces will arrive in hours or days. On December 24, American spearheads reach positions within artillery range of Bastogne's perimeter. The fighting intensifies as German units attempt to hold road junctions at all costs. These junctions, insignificant on a map, become decisive points where entire battalions collide in desperate attempts to control movement. Each delay compounds the strain on Patton's logistics, forcing commanders to make difficult choices about which routes and units receive priority. Patton responds with characteristic decisiveness. He redirects artillery to smash known German strongpoints and orders armored units to bypass heavily defended villages, even if it means advancing along less favorable terrain. The risk is clear. Vehicles may bog down or become isolated. Yet the alternative, slowing to methodically clear every obstacle, would surrender the initiative he has fought to maintain. German commanders now confront the consequences of their earlier assumptions. They had expected Allied reactions to be cautious and incremental, shaped by weather and logistical constraints. Instead, they face an opponent willing to absorb friction and uncertainty to preserve speed. Reports sent up the German chain of command grow increasingly urgent, warning that the southern flank of the offensive is in danger of collapse. As Christmas Day approaches, the battlefield reflects the cumulative effects of relentless pressure. Neither side achieves rest or clarity. Decisions are made with partial information, often under fire, and their consequences ripple outward almost immediately. Patton's choice to act without waiting for perfect conditions has transformed a defensive emergency into an operational counterstroke, but the outcome is still unresolved. The road to Bastogne remains contested, the relief effort balanced on a narrow margin between success and failure. Every mile gained carries a cost, and every delay threatens to erode the fragile advantage created by speed. The events unfolding now are not the product of a single bold decision, but of countless actions shaped by pressure, uncertainty, and the irreversible consequences of moving faster than the enemy can respond. As daylight breaks on December 25, the clearing skis finally deliver what Patton has been waiting for since issuing his orders days earlier. Allied aircraft appear overhead, their engines cutting through the cold air as they begin strafing German positions and dropping supplies to isolated American units. The change is immediate and visible. German columns that had been moving with relative freedom under cloud cover now scatter for concealment, and roads become dangerous corridors rather than safe avenues of maneuver. The renewed presence of air power tightens the operational vice. American artillery observers, now able to see targets more clearly, adjust fire with increasing accuracy. German attempts to reposition units around Bastogne are repeatedly disrupted, forcing commanders to commit reserves piecemeal instead of executing coordinated defensive actions. Each improvised response weakens their overall cohesion, a consequence of reacting to speed rather than shaping events. On the ground, Patton's lead elements encounter some of the fiercest resistance yet. German infantry, reinforced with assault guns and anti-tank weapons, dig in along wooded ridgelines overlooking the final approaches. The fighting becomes attritional, measured not in sweeping maneuvers but in yards gained at high cost. Company commanders make rapid decisions under fire, often without guidance from higher headquarters, as radio communications strain under the volume of traffic and the limits of terrain. Patton remains forward, moving between command posts despite the risks. His presence is not symbolic, it is operational. He presses subordinate commanders to exploit even the smallest opening, reminding them that hesitation now would undo everything already achieved. The pressure he applies is constant and personal, reinforcing the expectation that initiative must be seized rather than requested. Inside German headquarters, the situation is assessed with growing alarm. Intelligence reports confirm that American forces are closing in from the south faster than anticipated. The original objectives of the Ardennes offensive are quietly revised, then abandoned altogether. What remains is an effort to avoid encirclement and preserve combat power, a shift that marks the transition from ambition to damage control. By mid-morning, elements of the 4th Armored Division break through the outer German defenses near the village of Assenois. The engagement is sharp and costly, but the German line fractures under sustained pressure. Tanks push through gaps created by artillery fire, infantry following closely despite exhaustion and losses. The coordination is imperfect, but momentum compensates for friction. Within Bastogne, word spreads rapidly as the sound of American artillery grows unmistakably closer. Soldiers who have endured days of isolation recognize the change in tempo. German fire slackens, and scattered attempts to regroup fail to regain earlier intensity. Relief is no longer theoretical, it is approaching with audible certainty. The breakthrough does not end the fighting. German units continue to contest the corridor, launching counterattacks aimed at severing the narrow link Patton's forces have created. The situation remains fluid and dangerous, with supply lines vulnerable and units operating at the limits of endurance. Yet the strategic balance has shifted decisively. Speed, once a gamble, has become an irreversible fact on the ground. What unfolds next will test whether momentum alone can be sustained under mounting losses and logistical strain. The relief of Bastogne is not a conclusion, but a transition into a new phase of pressure and consequence, shaped by decisions made when waiting for permission was no longer an option. The narrow corridor carved open by the 4th Armored Division remains under constant threat as the day wears on. German artillery, though increasingly short on ammunition, concentrates its fire on crossroads and exposed stretches of road, turning every supply run into a calculated risk. Engineers work under shell fire to clear wreckage and widen passageways, knowing that a single blocked route could isolate forward elements once again. The operational success achieved through speed now demands endurance to hold it. Patton's headquarters tracks the situation hour by hour, maps crowded with grease pencil markings that change as quickly as reports arrive. Fuel consumption exceeds even Patton's aggressive estimates, forcing staff officers to improvise distribution plans that prioritize movement over comfort or reserve. Trucks intended for rear area logistics are pushed forward into contested zones. Their drivers briefed with little more than route directions, and the expectation that delays are unacceptable. German commanders attempt to reassert control through localized counterattacks. These actions lack the coordination envisioned at the start of the Ardennes offensive, but they remain dangerous. Small, determined units probe American flanks, exploiting forests and villages to mask movement. Each engagement drains strength from both sides, but the Germans now fight defensively, reacting to pressure rather than directing it. The psychological shift is unmistakable. American units that had advanced under extreme uncertainty now operate with a growing confidence that the larger effort is succeeding. This does not reduce fear or fatigue, but it alters decision-making. Platoon and company commanders press forward despite incomplete information, accepting losses that would have seemed reckless days earlier because the operational context demands continuity of movement above all else. Weather, which had played such a decisive role earlier, remains unstable. Low clouds intermittently ground aircraft, forcing ground units to assume responsibilities originally assigned to air support. When skies clear, even briefly, Allied aircraft strike with concentrated intensity, targeting German armor and supply columns already constrained by fuel shortages. Each sortie compounds German logistical problems, accelerating the collapse of their operational reach. Patton continues to reject proposals to pause and consolidate. He understands that the corridor's vulnerability cannot be eliminated through caution alone. Every hour spent stationary allows German units time to reorganize, redeploy, and regain initiative. Instead, he orders limited advances along the corridor's shoulders, widening the breach not through deliberate set-piece attacks, but through continuous pressure that denies the enemy predictable rhythms. Within German formations, morale fractures unevenly. Some units fight with renewed desperation, aware that retreat routes are narrowing. Others begin to disengage without orders, prioritizing survival over cohesion. Commanders struggle to maintain discipline as communications degrade, and the reality of strategic failure becomes unavoidable. The Ardennes offensive, conceived as a decisive gamble, has become a series of costly withdrawals disguised as resistance. As night approaches, the fighting does not diminish. Illumination rounds turn the snow-covered terrain into a shifting landscape of shadows and sudden brightness. Engagements erupt without warning as patrols collide at close range. The strain on soldiers is cumulative, measured in hours without sleep and decisions made under exhaustion that carry irreversible consequences. The corridor holds through the night, not because it is secure, but because it remains contested on terms increasingly favorable to the Americans. Speed has not eliminated danger, it has redefined it. What follows will determine whether Patton's gamble achieves strategic permanence or collapses under the weight of its own momentum, shaped by forces that continue to evolve faster than any single commander can fully control.